episode 19 today, I go into wholesale distribution for NetSuite. I talk through the order to cash process, procure-to-pay, inventory management, a little bit of WMS, accounting, and often the integrations that you would have for getting sales orders into NetSuite in the first place. So whether you are someone looking at NetSuite for the first time or already live on it and just want to make sure that you have it set up in the right way, this is going to be an episode for you. And I'll verbally go through all the core processes in this particular industry and some of the notable features that I notice people needing to add on or start implementing in future phases. Now, coming into this podcast episode, Michael, today I'm wearing flannel. It's Flannel Friday for me today. And being in the Midwest, it is our common apparel. And you know what? When I was working in distribution and in the warehouse area, in manufacturing days too, this was a common apparel then too. So it kind of matches that whole topic today.
And here's the deal: even in Minnesota, flannel is not off limits in the summertime. You know,
well,
especially
it's mid-July.
That's right. That's right. Even if you're hanging out outside, I mean, our offices are cold, right? So fair game in there, totally fair game in the upper Midwest.
Yeah, even when it's humid, flannel's still appropriate.
That's right.
Well, let's go into like our first topic today. We're going to cover a few things as much as I can today. I'm going to talk through the order to cash process, inventory management. We'll talk about the procure-to-pay process areas, a little bit through accounting, what the controller and accountant might know. We'll probably touch on a bit of the supply chain side, helping on demand planning. Very briefly, we talk a lot about B2B e-commerce on this podcast, so we won't cover it too much today. We're mostly going to talk about the back office, those back-end processes that NetSuite helps solve, and some of the related software that is integrating into NetSuite for most of our customers. Probably 80% of our clients are in the wholesale distribution and manufacturing space, or it's pretty close in that range. And it's a topic that we are constantly helping people implement on this technology in both e-commerce and ERP. So that's what we're going to cover. Okay. The first part that I want to first cover is, where does it all begin? I always like to start with the sales. Everything starts with sales. So we're going to start at the sales order. Now, there's a few different ways that a sales order might get into NetSuite. That's the beginning of the order management process. That sales order might get in through a phone call, very common in wholesale distribution type of environments, where you've got sales reps taking phone calls, receiving emails with the purchase order on it, or just any type of interaction like that. I have seen a couple clients here and there that still get faxes. That's really rare nowadays, but it technically exists. Those are going to be like the three primary ways that I'm going to notice in the distribution space. And there's going to be a couple other areas, I suppose, that are through integrations. The other two areas that the sales order is going to need to get into NetSuite is via EDI from their customers may have an EDI need, or also on the e-commerce website. Most people in wholesale distribution, there's a surprisingly large amount that haven't evolved with their technology. They've maybe been on an ERP or solution 10, 20 years ago, and definitely are not on an e-commerce solution. They've been really struggling, and probably their customers and vendors are just pushing them towards, hey, like, we need you to have better technology. You need to be state of the art if you're going to survive. And those are probably the areas that I'd see pretty much covers how orders would get into NetSuite. Now, Anchor Group implements e-commerce solutions, and we implement the rest of what I just talked about. But it is important to know that NetSuite handles the inputs of a sales order from all of these areas. Okay, that's the first step of this process.
Quick question for you, Caleb, on that. How does punch-out solutions fit into that? How often are you seeing that for this wholesale channel?
That's a good point. It could also exist right at this stage where the punch-out you'd have a punch-out solution that would get the order in at that stage too. You're right. That could be another option as well. That happens in some of the wholesale distribution space, but only in certain industries. I'm going to see that type of scenario a lot more in larger distributors, where maybe they have customers in the government or They may have other distributors that are much larger distributors, and they're just kind of a small entity providing products and other types of inventory to a much larger distributor, and they're just kind of a small one. Those larger distributors often will have a need and requirement for a punch-out solution. So it just depends on your industry that you're in, on whether your customers are asking for that. But each of the different ways that I described orders needing to get into NetSuite, those are pretty well encompassing of all the scenarios. Half of those are going to be manual, so like a phone call, you take an email. Those are going to be the ones where you're logging into NetSuite, going to the customer or creating a new customer record and creating a new sales order, adding the individual lines with the quantity. Now, NetSuite already has price levels. You can set customer-specific pricing. Like, these are all very much there, suite promotions. You've got all this functionality to make sure that it defaults the pricing for that specific customer that you've already onboarded. And it'll just inherit it as you adding the lines to the sales order. After that, the sales order is going to show whether you have quantity available, and quantity available is the summation of your actual inventory in stock minus the already committed amount equals quantity available. Upon sales order approval, and you can choose whether to have it approved or automatically go to approval, or if it has to sit in an unapproved stage first. But let's just go with the assumption you have an approval process on the sales order. Then upon sales order approval, that new sales order is getting committed, and now that inventory is already consumed and the new total available is up to date in NetSuite. And that new total available, if you have integrations with different e-commerce, maybe it's Amazon, eBay, your direct e-commerce, that new updated inventory then would sync into each of those new channels so that every one of them have updated inventory based on your current, not just what's in the warehouse, but what about subtract all the things in processing that are on that order. If you do not have any inventory available when you approve it, two things can trigger. You're going to need to go procure that inventory that is not in stock. What that looks like, most commonly in the distribution space, is you're going to have either dropship or special order. Let me just describe the main differences between these, because they're just a flag that decide how to trigger the PO, the purchase order from the sales order if you don't have anything in stock. A dropship means that, okay, my customer needs this. I don't have enough in stock. So that delta, I'm going to go to my default primary vendor. I may have multiple vendors, but I'm just going to go to my default vendor for this particular item. And I'm going to ask that vendor to I'm going to send you a PO. I need you to send that product directly to my customer from your warehouse. A special order means it's very similar, but the shipping is different. You're going to say, my vendor, I need you to ship this amount of product to my warehouse so I can pull everything together and ship it to the customer in one shipment from my own warehouse. That's the difference between dropship and special order in an order management solution.
Caleb, I have a question for you on that. Is the both processes seem similar but different? But my question is the process in its entirety, is it manual, or within NetSuite, is there a way to automate that so when that flag is triggered, that automation kicks into place so that you don't have to manually have so many tasks to go through that process? How does that work?
You don't have to manually create the purchase order if you're out of stock. The way NetSuite natively works, or can be configured to do this very easily, but the most common scenario is going to be where when you do have a need for a dropship or a special order, this will immediately trigger automatically that purchase order, that demand for it. So you don't have to really be able to track that all that much. It'll trigger that process automatically. And you can either have it just show up in a feed to your procurement team so they can see all their inventory demand that they need to be from current orders to go dropship, or you can automatically have it say, hey, vendor, purchase order, please proceed. And that's going to be like the main way that you're going to be able to get that information through. So it's mostly automatic, and you can even automate it even further with some enhanced workflows.
Yeah,
So
that's
pretty
helpful.
straightforward. So now at this stage, ideally you have either told your vendors that you're drop shipping or a special order, but what about that inventory that you have in stock? At that stage, you need to go through a pick, pack, ship process. You can also just mark it as shipped. There's a record in NetSuite called the item fulfillment record. This is a GL impacting transaction. And the beauty about a full ERP versus like QuickBooks is that you're going to have your accounting live impacted throughout the process and order management, meaning that when a sales order comes in and there's cash, it hits your GL. When inventory is fulfilled and shipped, it automatically reduces that inventory off of your books and hits your GL as well. So these are automatic transactions that occur, and it's really beneficial for the accounting team to get really live details there. All right, let's take that aside for a moment and just focus on the operations for a little bit longer. I've got a sales order. I need to go pick these sales orders. So now I have a list of all the sales orders that I need to go pick. This is that item fulfillment record. So at this stage, the warehouse has a list. They have a dashboard that shows all of the orders that are pending shipment, that our inventory is in stock. They need to go pick all these products. So they're going to look at that list, see I've got product A, quantity of 3 in stock, which is in this location over here in the warehouse, maybe a specific bin that may exist. I'm going to go pick that, pack it, and mark it as shipped. There are some companies that don't want to go through those stages. Maybe they just have low volume. They'll just immediately mark it as shipped at that stage and complete the fulfillment process. So there's a couple variations. There is another layer of this beyond what I just described. That's probably like the very basic pick, pack, ship process out of NetSuite. When you're doing higher volumes, it does make sense to do the add-on module for NetSuite WMS, or even integrate a third-party WMS solution that integrates to NetSuite. No matter what, they're all interacting with that same item fulfillment record, just in different user interfaces, and they may have their own features that are beneficial in each particular solution. So what WMS starts to allow for is for much better scanning functionality, also put away strategies as an example. You might want full cycle counting. Now, you don't need full WMS to do an inventory count. You can still use an inventory adjustment worksheet with standard out of the box. So as we're walking someone through their NetSuite evaluation and helping them educate what they have and what the next layer, I'm trying to pinpoint them to say, and put myself in their shoes, what do you really need right now? Because most of the time for wholesale distributors that are under 20 million in annual revenue, most of the time the advanced inventory management without the full WMS module is sufficient, because within that has all your reorder points, serialized and lot items if you need to be able to do traceability. And like it's already got those. You have the ability to do bins and locations and pick, pack, ship. It's mostly with the rest of those next layer of handling higher volume where you're going to want put away strategies when you have receiving product in. You're going to want to do cycle counting, not just inventory adjustment worksheets. You're going to want more scanning functionality, so it's easier to scan and when you're doing that pick, pack, ship process, as well as to verify that all the products are in that container. There's just extra functionality when you're doing that that pick, pack, ship process and receiving with the full WMS. But advanced inventory management for people who are doing a very manageable number of fulfillments in a day, which is common in the wholesale distribution. You may be doing multiple pallet sizes, maybe 20 pallets, and that's very manageable for a lot of companies. It just depends on your volume, whether I start to ask about full WMS if they need it. And if I don't specify the differences between advanced inventory management and help them understand that in WMS, people will automatically say, yeah, we need full WMS. So I always take a step back, educate them on the differences, and like at least 60% of the time, they end up saying, yeah, all we need is advanced inventory management. And then I just saved you a bunch of licensing costs, just saved you a bunch of implementation costs, and I got you exactly what you need and not more. And it's important to go in those phases and to educate. So a lot covered so far.
That's right. Now, quick question for you, Caleb, on that. So you just kind of spoke about when a company might not need that full WMS solution, but when would you recommend, if a company does not have that right now, and they're wondering, okay, when is it going to be the right time to upgrade to that full full system? What are some things that you would call out as kind of like red flags? If you see this happening in your business with what you currently have, then it's probably time to start considering WMS. Any suggestions there?
I'd say it's a little bit hard to know exactly, but if you're already live on NetSuite and using that pick, pack, ship process, you know the current status quo at that stage. Once you've started to realize that maybe it's taking too long and you're doing high enough volumes where scanning makes a massive difference, then like if you're shipping a bunch of $50 orders, $100 orders, and you're a $20 million business, that means that you're doing a lot of volume in comparison to someone whose average order value is maybe like 10 to 30,000. Like that's a very big difference. And in the wholesale distribution space, it's most common for their average order value to be much higher. That's why they have dedicated sales reps that are taking in phone calls. Otherwise, you would have zero margins if you have dedicated sales reps entering in an order for like a $50 order. Your margins would be immediately wiped as they're placing the order because you're paying their salaries. So that's the big differentiator, is depending on your order volume.
Kip, what I hear you saying is that if revenue starts to get impacted because of how much time it's taking for the warehouse to manage, then it's probably time to add the WMS solution on top of that, to upgrade to it.
Yeah, that's right. And ultimately, I'm going to ask a lot of questions to decide, all right, is the NetSuite WMS module going to be best for you? Is a third party? Don't be afraid of third-party solutions. There's real value that they can provide as an option, as well as the NetSuite WMS option. And we'll often just help guide people through that evaluation and then help them to see what's the best fit for them. I am a big fan of evaluating 2 to 3 WMS solutions before you actually select one. And then I'll really go through that process with clients, especially when they ask me to. Okay, so we've gotten through some of the core order management flow. I didn't really speak to you about the cash piece. In the wholesale distribution space, it's most common for the customers to be on terms, which means that you haven't yet collected any payment. You could have scenarios where you collect payment up front. If that was the case, when you created the sales order, if there's a credit card or some type of banking information on the customer record, or if you collect it at the time of the sales order, you can input it there. And what it'll ultimately do is, the most common scenario is that it creates a cash sale associated to that sales order, meaning that you've received that money. Let's say, for instance, that they're on net 30 terms, your customers. Then in that case, you'd have the sales order that then goes into the fulfillment process. And at that stage, most commonly it'd be after fulfillment, then it's ready to be invoiced. And you can invoice off of the sales order and have it it'll be like a table that shows, here's all of the sales orders that have been shipped pending billing. That's a status on the sales order. All these records are related so that the sales order can have the statuses so that it can trigger the next stage in the process. So for instance, there would be a sales order not approved to being approved. And then once the fulfillment is pending, it'll be pending shipment. And when the fulfillment's complete, it would be pending billing because the shipment's complete. So now that shows up in a list of, show me all my sales orders that are in the pending billing status. And that's when you can go and create all the invoices for all those customers, get them sent out so that they can be paid. Now, these invoices, I've seen scenarios where people just create the invoices and copy and paste or download the PDF from that invoice and mail them out of Outlook. That is by far the thing that I've noticed is like, hey, stop doing that. We've got to fix that process. It's common for people to do what they've done before on a go live, but for sure during our managed services, we're definitely addressing that part whenever we're helping our managed service clients. So at that stage, they may modify the PDF template. You can modify any of the PDF templates in NetSuite down to the HTML and free marker level. So like we can totally modify it. Now, there's been scenarios where the data doesn't exist on the invoice, but you want to print it on the invoice. Then we'll use like a workflow or maybe even a script that we'll use a lot of our in-house resources just to move the data, get it onto the invoice so that it can be printed on the PDF. There's a second option, which is to also email it within the body of an email. And when you email within the body of the email, it's not an attachment, it's just showing up within the email itself. Those are two different options that you can do here, but it's really up to you on what you like. But what I do like to do is initiate the email directly out of NetSuite. And that's what I would say is always going to be the best. Most payment processors that we're going to advise people set up within their NetSuite environment are integrated with the invoice, meaning that you can have a payment link on there. And that payment link, your customer will receive the invoice via PDF or that email template. It'll trigger that email out of NetSuite. I like to do it automatically to save your AR team. And then that customer will receive that invoice. They can use the click-to-pay or any of the other information like ACH or if they cut you a check. At that stage, if they don't pay their invoice, we often are setting up, there's two really core things you can do here. There's a dunning module by NetSuite, which I suppose is an option, but what that does is that follow-up sequence for invoicing. And let's say they don't pay, they're late, like it's due soon, what's that sequence look like? A lot of teams are managing that manually, and it's a waste of their time, especially when you're doing many tens or hundreds of these invoices. It's just not a good use of their time. It's a very easy workflow. So even without dunning module, it's a really basic workflow. And in our own NetSuite environment, we actually just went the workflow route because it's just a simple thing to set up as a recurring sequence, sending from a particular employee record with just like slightly increasing language, just to very gentle, just a gentle reminder, hey, you got to pay this, so it progresses. And so if you're a client listening to this, if you see that language increase, it's a workflow. It's not an actual person. But it is a really good way just to keep people reminding them that it's about to be due. So that's that piece. From there, the customer needs to pay that invoice. All right, so they pay it. If they use the click-to-pay, most of the payment options that are integrating with NetSuite will automatically create the payment record against the invoice, meaning that it ties it out and reconciles it whenever it's paid. This is great. This saves the accounting team a lot of time. And the alternative way is, let's say they pay via check. You get the check in. You have to manually create that payment record. Say, go to that invoice. I have this check. Create the payment record against the invoice so I know what amount, is it partial or full amount of that invoice has been paid. And what I just described just now is the full order to cash process. All right, a little bit wordy, but I'm trying to go as detailed as possible. Yeah. So going into the next topic is going to be, let's address a little bit more on the procure-to-pay side. We briefly talked about it with dropship and a special order, but what we also want to address is, what about like reorder points in general? Advanced inventory management that comes out of the box with most of the product editions, meaning like wholesale distribution editions of NetSuite. That particular module is like something we're always setting up. And it has basic demand planning already included. And what I mean, when people tell me demand planning, it can mean a couple things. Most commonly, what they care about is just reorder points. There is demand planning beyond that is going to use historical procurement data. When someone's going live with NetSuite, I'm not like doing time phase or seasonal. I'm not doing all of this other type of demand planning based on MRP and that material resource planning, and that's generating all of that. What we're really just going to do is just reorder points because we need historical data anyways, and most of the time when they say demand planning, they just need reorder points. What that looks like is when we're setting up the item record in NetSuite, that we're setting up and configuring it so it can handle landed cost, get all your costing correctly, but you're also inputting, all right, at what level when my total inventory available, meaning already committed inventory is deducted, when does my procurement team know that they should go reorder more? And that's what that reorder point does. It's just a value on the item. And that way, whenever it drops below that threshold, it will automatically tell the procurement team that I need to order X amount more to get above my quantity threshold level that I need. And so that helps the procurement team know what to order without having to go analyze all of their inventory every single week or every day or whatever the frequency is. They're automatically knowing how much of each product to buy, and then they can create those purchase orders. So really helpful, because if you get that wrong, you're buying a lot of extra inventory and all of your cash is getting totally tied up in inventory without the true demand.
Yeah, and then when you do the inventory, when you do go count up your inventory, the resets are a little bit harsher, right? Because when you eventually realize that you have overpurchased over the weeks or months.
Yeah, I've known people that have spent millions and millions in POs that they didn't realize they needed to do. Their demand plan was off. They've made a big mistake. They've got to go sell all this. All their cash is tied up. It can really damage the business financially if you make a mistake on your purchase orders. Okay. All right. So on the procure-to-pay, we've generated our purchase orders based on that demand, or just standalone purchase orders that maybe weren't based on demand. You just have a new product that you are offering. Go create a purchase order. Okay. That then needs to receive. There'll be an item receipt in the warehouse. That means that you're going from the order, that inventory is now coming onto your books. You're going to get an invoice from your vendor that you have to enter into NetSuite as a vendor bill. NetSuite has a module called Bill Capture, and there's a number of other AP automation solutions for NetSuite that can utilize OCR to extract the data from an email of an invoice and automatically create the vendor bill. The ROI here is largely dependent on your volume of vendor bills that you need to create. I'll just use a rough rule of thumb. If you're doing less than 20 a week, that's very manageable manually. Exceeding 20 a week, you're probably going to be wanting an OCR solution to be able to automatically extract that data and create those vendor bills so that you can run those payments and make sure people get paid on time. That's just kind of a rough number to work with. And then at that stage, NetSuite has something called three-way match, which is going to be tying the invoice, the vendor bill, with the purchase order and the item receipt to make sure that they all tie out. And that really is the procure-to-pay process, because that vendor bill is the payment towards the vendor that you can initiate. We're making it through.
That's right.
All right, I think I've got one last little topic to cover today, and I'm just going to briefly touch on the accounting side now. I've been hinting at a few things of what accounting throughout the order to cash and the procure-to-pay process. Money is coming in and out the door, and accounting is involved throughout the process, like invoices, receiving the payment, receiving an invoice from a vendor, paying vendors. So they're all involved with all of this process. One thing I haven't mentioned is there's a native bank feed suite app, which is a reconciliation of your bank and your transactions there. And there is a certain number of banks that this is compatible with. And we always, whenever we're setting up a new NetSuite implementation and setting up a new environment, we're double checking against that list of verified. I think it's like 14,000 banks, but there are some like random small banks that aren't compatible that I always like just double check that, make sure it is. And even when there's a not compatible bank, there's a couple of third-party apps that are very affordable. Like, I don't know, they're very like in the low hundreds that you have to pay for these to be able to make that bank compatible. So really all your major national banks are going to be compatible for that bank feeds, which helps you when you're doing all that reconciliation. And we've covered the main processes. NetSuite, of course, chart of accounts, multi-subsidiary entities. You can have one NetSuite instance, toggle between them, roll up financial data to the holding company, segment them out differently, use custom segments, class, departments, locations. There is so much financial benefit to being able to manage your books with NetSuite, and particularly when you're a multi-entity. And that can be noticeably easier than having, like in QuickBooks, you have to have often multiple different QuickBooks environments that you're managing the books, logging into each of these environments separately, where NetSuite is consolidated, much easier. You can even do intercompany transactions and automate a lot of intercompany transaction processes if that's needed. Let's say that you are the wholesale distributor of your sister company and you're like the vendor of your other company, and they're doing intercompany transactions. NetSuite can manage all this from an accounting level. You can do journal entries however you need. There's expense management. Even expense solutions will integrate to those same expense records inside of NetSuite. So very robust across the board. And we've done other episodes where we talked about the pros and cons of QuickBooks versus NetSuite and kind of dug into those details a little bit more. So that was a lot of me talking, but
That's
I
okay.
think we covered.
It's all good information, and I can see a lot of that if you're somebody who's in the wholesale distribution industry and you're thinking about going with NetSuite. I think a lot of that could be helpful. In addition, if you already have NetSuite and you're in that industry, I think a lot of that could be helpful. But I guess to summarize what this shows me is that NetSuite is an incredibly powerful tool that has a lot of the capabilities built into it natively that these companies can leverage. In addition, there's modules that you can stack on top of it to build out your infrastructure in your ERP the way that you need.
That's right. But whether it's from NetSuite implementation or post go live, we're helping our customers along the way, helping them set it up and optimize it. People often think like, oh, once I'm live, it's done. If your business isn't evolving, your processes aren't, you're probably in a rough spot for your business. So even though like, yes, we train our customers, but they get so busy that we just give them the bandwidth they need and expertise they need. And we have so much experience and database in our knowledge base that we can tap into to help maybe paint the picture of the art of the possible, and that we can really bring a fresh perspective to the art of the possible and what NetSuite can do and make great strides in their automations and create efficiencies, even if they're already live on NetSuite. And I have a lot of fun solution designing, thinking creatively, thinking outside of the box, and helping clients through that process. And I know our entire team does too throughout our Midwest offices. So I have a lot of fun with it. But we covered everything I think we needed to today. Order to cash, inventory management, a little bit of WMS in there, just briefly talking about the differences. We talked a bit about procure-to-pay as well as accounting. And I think we covered pretty much everything, which is great in a short period of time.
That's right. You
Cool.
did a great job of explaining it. So thank you for doing that, Caleb.
No problem. Well, let's on our upcoming topics. I know we're going to talk even more and more about e-commerce, and I'm sure people who are looking at NetSuite for wholesale distribution are already on it and maybe want to take their e-commerce to the next level or get it in the first place. We will continue to have our conversations there because it is one of the many channels to help wholesale and distributors really break into something that oftentimes they're behind on.